Welcome back to Rerouted, where we explore unique career paths to give you the tools you need to create the life you want. On today's episode, I talk with Asheesh Advani, CEO of Junior Achievement Worldwide, one of the world's largest and most impactful youth-serving nonprofits. We discuss his early career in management consulting, his time founding a leading fintech company, his time leading an international nonprofit, and the writing of his international best-selling book, Modern Achievement. Let's get into it. Asheesh, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you doing?
It's a pleasure to be here. I'm doing very well.
Awesome. All right, let's start off. I want to talk a little about your educational background. Can you bring us through your undergraduate and then your postgraduate?
Sure. So I'm Canadian. I grew up in Canada, so I applied to school in the U.S. because my brother, who is about 4 years older than me, he'd already sort of started school in the U.S., started college in the U.S. So that he was blazed the trail for me. Let me put it that way. And so I applied early decision to Penn, to Wharton, and I got in. And that was, my I guess my choice to study business, which at the time seemed like a bold choice because in those days,
Hmm.
studying business undergraduate was not that common.
Hmm.
And then after that, I went off to graduate school in England. I went to Oxford. I applied for a bunch of scholarships. And the reason I did apply is I went to visit a friend who, like older than me, who was already studying there. And honestly, I didn't know that much about studying in England because I hadn't done study abroad there. So I just honestly just didn't know. And I spent a week with him on like spring break, I think, and learned so much about the benefits of studying in the UK that I decided to pursue these scholarship applications. And I got lucky, one of them worked out. And so I did a master's and a PhD, which at Oxford's called the DPhil, which was a phenomenal experience.
All right. So after you finished your PhD, what was your first job? Or your DPhil, sorry.
So I had worked in my summers for the World Bank. And prior to undergrad, I'd worked at Monitor Company, which is became known as Monitor Group, and then was acquired by Deloitte, and now it's Monitor Deloitte. But in those days, it was a standalone company based officially in Cambridge, Massachusetts, founded by a bunch of Harvard Business School people, but it expanded around the world. So I was working there during its expansion phase. So I worked in the Toronto office and moved to Amsterdam as that office was quite nascent, and then moved and worked in the Cambridge office after I finished graduate school. So I worked at the World Bank for my summers, and then briefly after I graduated, um, and then I went back to Monitor where I'd worked after undergrad.
So you were doing working in Amsterdam. That was just for a summer?
It's actually a good story. So I had worked at Monitor for, think of it as my junior year summer. It was a bit more than that because I took the semester off and worked there for longer.
Sure.
But so I'd already in my junior year had that, I'll call it early consulting experience. And I loved Monitor because it was a very optimistic firm. A lot of people who worked there, I felt were really trying to make the world a better place through business
Hmm.
as opposed to work in business. And by the way, make the world a better place. And a Monitor was just this incredibly positive environment. So I accepted their offer to start there after graduation. Um, but then I also mentioned I was going to apply to a bunch of scholarships, not knowing if I'd get them. And actually, my direct supervisor, my mentor at Monitor, who was a partner in the Toronto office, he helped by writing recommendations for these scholarships. And as I said, I got one. So I had to go back to him and said, thank you for the full-time offer, but I actually can't accept now because I got one of these.
Hmm.
And he said, well, we're expanding in Europe and the Amsterdam office could benefit from you if you're open to it. So I said, yes. And so after I graduated, I I joined the Amsterdam office knowing that I was going to go to Oxford after a few months.
All right. That's neat. What was it like living in foreign, I guess, you did your school in the US, but from being from Canada, but what was it like living somewhere new like that for such a short period of time?
Well, I don't need to tell you, Nick, given that you're on study abroad right now, the benefit of, seeing the world.
Mm.
It gives you a completely different perspective, makes you value what we have, but also opens your mind up to, how unique and different and similar as well people are around the world. You sort of
Mm,
get all the benefits of seeing a diversity in the global sense of the word, not the American sense of the world of the word. And it's very empowering, actually. So
mm,
for me as well, I was born in India and I grew up in Canada. So um, British stuff had been infiltrated into my way of thinking for a long time, and
mm,
Commonwealth stuff. And my scholarship was actually the Commonwealth Scholarship. So it's for people from Commonwealth countries. And it was a great scholarship program. It's attracted some great people over the years. And so I felt part of a community, which was really great. But being in the UK and meeting people from not just the Commonwealth, but all over the world was incredible. The college I went to at Oxford is called St. Anthony's College, which is probably one of the most international colleges as well. It attracts people who want to study like international politics, international relations, international economics. And so the environment is just very vibrant. Like after eating, we'd all go and get coffee, and we'd be reading like The Economist, and we'd be reading the International Herald Tribune, we'd be reading all these global papers, and the Germans would be reading Der Spiegel, and we'd be talking about how different papers wrote about the same topic very differently.
mm,
And that was
mhm.
my first real exposure to how media and living in a bubble might influence the way people think, which now, of course, is now kind of we all realize that we all live in our own bubble. So it was a great early experience.
All right. So you mentioned after finishing your bachelor's and then also finishing your PhD, you're working at Monitor Group. What was that like? What did you do there?
So strategy consulting, you're assigned to projects every 2 to 6 months. They change. So I worked on many different projects. I'll tell you a few. At the time, Monitor had, because it was founded by Michael Porter, who's a professor at Harvard Business School. I don't know if you've heard of him, but in my day, he was a very big deal professor. Um, his famous book is called Competitive Advantage, and he had many additional books. One is called Competitive Advantage of Nations. The five forces model is what he's probably, I'd say one of the things that he's most known for, but he's done a lot more than that, of course. And the Competitive Advantage of Nations was one of the first books to apply, I'll say, business strategy thinking to
Mm-hmm.
the way that nations build a portfolio of activities to create prosperity and growth. And it seems so intuitive now, but in those days it was new. And so this idea of applying a thoughtful way to do industrial policy without calling it industrial policy was very intellectually appealing to me, partly because I've been studying that. So to go back to
Mm-hmm.
Monitor and be able to apply some of the things that I'd learned about, at Wharton, we called it emerging economies. At Oxford, we called it developing economies. And there are just nuances of the way that you think about how growth occurs and how to ensure that growth is for everyone, not just for the few. And
Mm,
so what Michael Porter had done with the competitive advantage of nations is he had a bunch of frameworks that we could apply. So at Monitor, I worked on projects which were actually not just for companies, but also for countries. So I worked
mm,
on like the privatization strategy for a country or the industrial policy for a country. And then at the same time, I'd be like staffed on an assignment to, I'll tell you one, which is one of my favorite ones, was working for a Canadian company that was doing private label chocolate chip cookies.
mm,
And I learned, for example, in that engagement that consumers make decisions, of course, not just based on brand, but based on other factors, and how you could create a brand from scratch, which was associated with the retailer, not associated with the product. So you could have a brand
mm,
like, for example, President's Choice in Canada, a very famous brand, which is from the retailer, not based on the product. And it
mm,
applies to many different products. So I learned about how the economics of a consumer product works based on the brand, based on the manufacturer, based on the margin of the retailer, based on all the other factors in the value chain. And I'd go from that to, doing a strategy for, telecom privatization. So it was really
mm.
cool. I mean, in those days, to be able to toggle between such radically different things. I don't know if that's as possible now in consulting with larger firms specializing and you sort of join a group and you tend to do more of the same stuff. But at least in those
Hmm.
days, I found the variety was great for me.
Sure. Do you feel like there's been a certain advantage or some benefits that you've gotten from starting your career in that way?
I think the world has changed. Let me start by saying that. So what was true for
Sure.
me 20, 30 years ago is no longer true, but for me,
Mm.
absolutely. I think working in a strategy consulting firm helped me be a better communicator. It helped me understand, or at least it built my confidence to reinforce maybe my intuition for how things are done in the business world because I got to be in boardrooms. One of my clients at the time, I should say our clients because I was a young guy, was a, a big Dutch beer company, which shall remain nameless. But I got to be in the boardroom for this giant Dutch beer company as like the only native English speaker. All the rest were Dutch speakers.
Mm.
So they switched to English for me, which was just amazing to sort of see them be that kind and generous in being able to sort of toggle back and forth between Dutch and English for me. And it sort of it gives you a sense of how business is done, and it gives you a sense of confidence that you can go and be in other boardrooms and not feel out of place. And to me, that's one of
Mm.
the big benefits of having a job in consulting.
All right. So you said the world has changed. Do you think that you spend a lot of time working with young people, or at least leading an organization that works with young people, which we'll talk about later. But with this insight, do you think that there are other careers that, for somebody like my age, that kind of give you that same sort of perspective?
Well, I'd say the biggest way the world has changed is credentials matter less, skills matter more.
Mm.
So if you can continue to build skills that, and I would say skill set and mindset that allows you to thrive in the world of today, that is more valuable than adding yet one more credential to your already impressive resume.
Mm.
I do think a lot of young people intuitively know that, but they still chase credibility through brands and
Mm.
credibility through credentials. Probably because it's the age, and when you're young, it's hard to believe that your skills are going to be valued. I will say though, as somebody who hires now, I really don't care that much where you went to university. I care
Mm.
much more about what people say about working with you, how many environments you've worked in, how long you've stayed in those environments, how you built mentors who then would potentially call me or I'd call as a reference check to make sure that you are who you say you are and you have been able to interact with people well. Um, so that was, I'd say, much less true in my day, where credentials really got you through life because it was almost a
Mm.
linear path. You went to certain schools, you got hired in certain jobs, and then the people who came before you also went to those schools and had those jobs, so they ended up wanting to hire you thereafter. I think that is
Mm.
much less true now, still somewhat true, but much less true now. And
Mm.
so I tend to remind people of that. One other big change, Nick, and I think I've probably talked to you about this in the past, is you're going to have many jobs and many careers in your life, many more than I've had,
Mm.
and certainly many more than my father and my mother had. So my father worked for IBM for over 30 years.
Mm.
He went to engineering school, got hired at IBM, stayed at IBM for his entire career, basically, in different geographies, India, Canada, US. And that career path led to a certain risk profile, a certain way to communicate, a certain way to interact with people, a certain way to build skills, which I think have all fundamentally changed. If you're going to have many careers and many jobs, and if you look at some of the data, at least 20 careers and at least 20 jobs and at least 7 different careers. With that
Wow.
much change, where you went to school in your late teens and 20s, it's just not going to matter by job number 3. It's not going to matter.
Yeah.
So the skills you have, the network you build, and the mindset you have to be able to shift will matter way more in the future than it's mattered in the past.
All right. Thank you for that insight. So after you were working at Monitor, you left and you founded Circle Lending. Can you tell me a little bit about how and why you went about founding?
Sure. So at the World Bank, I'd worked on projects to help understand the informal financing market. Let's call it peer-to-peer finance is the newer term for it, but in those days it was just called informal finance. What does that mean? That means, how do people raise money for their businesses? Do they go
Mm.
to credit cards? Do they go to banks? Or do they go to friends and family and their social circle? So when you look at that data, you realize the vast majority of the world borrows money from their social circle for business, for education, to fund the acquisition of assets of various types, even homes. Homes,
Mm,
education, and intellectual assets, you will fund through your social circle.
mm,
So the internet was just in Web 1.0 land, and I tried to connect the dots between that very human behavior, the problems that are created from that human behavior, and how this new thing called the internet could help address
mm,
that. So it was the beginning of peer-to-peer lending. So people borrowing money from other people and effectively using the internet to manage that transaction well, from everything from documentation to moving the money, what we call loan servicing, through credit reporting for loans that go bad, or credit building for loans that go well, through
mm,
to expanding your circle, where it's not just your parents you go to, but a broader circle of your social network. So
mm,
my business was called Circle Lending, which helped create that market of peer-to-peer lending, which eventually became known as social finance. We do it, we did it in a very, very focused and sort of narrow way. We focused on products which help people buy homes. The product was called Mortgage Master, where you could borrow money to buy a home, and we do all the tax reporting. And in those days, and still true now, if you don't formalize the loan, you can't deduct the interest payments,
mm,
which in the US is important because it's actually you save quite a bit of money if you deduct your home mortgage interest payments. So if you borrow money off your parents or from somebody you know, you can't deduct that against your taxes, the interest you're paying, unless it's a properly managed, formalized loan. So we
mm,
would help people with that product. And then we had a product called Handshake Plus, which was for unsecured loans between people who know each other. And then we had a product called Business Builder for startup loans. And then over time, we launched an education loan product, a reverse mortgage loan product, where a retiring parent, an elderly parent, could pass their home to their kids in a very tax
mm,
efficient way and generate income in their retired years without getting a third party involved. So all the wealth was kept in the family, which is a huge product. The Wall Street Journal called it one of the most innovative products of the year. We won all these awards actually in those days for, I'll call it financial product innovation. And we realized that this was actually a social venture. So this was one of the first ventures at the time that attracted what is now called impact investors, but in those days was called double bottom line investors. And we were able to get great supporters, including an organization called the Center for Financial Services Innovation, CFSI.
okay,
And they invested in us. It was one of the first deals they did where they put basically foundation money into a for-profit, which is hard to do and now is more common. Those days, it was one of the first transactions. So it was really great to be part of, I would say, the beginning of this field of
yeah,
double bottom line or social investing, impact investing, and learning the motivations of different types of investors. And we got, of course, venture capital from some great firms. And then the company was acquired in 2006.
right. Would you mind sharing that number? I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm a little curious.
How much we were acquired for? Is that what you
Yeah,
mean?
yeah.
But honestly, it's kind of uncool to be sharing how much your company was acquired for. I just want to
That's
let
okay.
you
I don't,
in
sorry,
part of
yeah.
part of the zeitgeist of it was a great outcome. It was a great outcome.
Okay.
Um, it Let me put it this way: it was several multiples ahead of revenue and earnings, and all the investors in the first round, second round, and third round at that time made money who sold to Virgin. So it was a big win. And I may have gotten the dates wrong. Now I'm screwing up. It might have been 2007. I can't believe I actually forgotten. I think it was May 2007. And now that I think
Okay.
back, I want to make sure I correct the record. But it
Uh-huh.
was, it was a very complex transaction because a Virgin wanted to launch their brand in financial services in the US.
Mm,
And so, um, in addition to the acquisition of stock, they also capitalized the company to grow. So they needed
mm,
additional capital. So they allowed some investors who didn't want to sell to stay. So it
mm,
was, think of it this way, it was a majority um, kind of ownership change where they bought out kind of all the early investors who wanted to sell, and they allowed one of the venture capital firms to stay in to ride the upside as well. So it was a relatively complex transaction to close because we had to not only sell, but we also had to ensure that a couple of the key investors chose to stay, and
Mm,
it all worked out. But it wasn't like a let's close in a week. It was a
mhm,
3-month process of making sure that we had full transparency to all of our stakeholders who may have wanted to not sell by virtue of having the chance to work with Richard Branson and invest in his companies. One thing Richard does really well, is he's built a brand that people want to be associated with. So when he comes
mm,
along and buys your company, there's some people who are like, well, if I get to stay, I want to be with Richard. Like he just has this ability to attract the brand. Virgin and Richard Branson have built the ability to attract customers, employees, and investors. And it's amazing, amazing to watch how the same company, literally the same people, the same company, went from being called Circle Lending to be called Virgin Money, and how it just changed our prospects for
mm.
attracting. We grew 4x in 1 year, 4x in one year,
Wow.
just by virtue of the brand changing. Of course, all the attention we got around the acquisition probably helped. We blocked off Copley Square in Boston and did a launch event, and we did some cool things. But um, it just it educated me about the power of brand, which I intuitively maybe thought about, but I never really lived through. And living through
Mm,
it is very different than intellectually sort of thinking about it.
sure. I want to apologize. Did not mean to
Oh,
cross the
don't
line,
worry. You
break
can
through. Is
ask any
that good?
question, Nick. Ask me any question. I'll just tell you if I don't want to answer. Okay.
Okay, then that's perfect. All right, then. So what's your social security number? Okay, next question. So, what do you think was the biggest lesson that you learned through going through this whole process, founding your company, MMP acquired, all of that?
I mean, there's so many lessons you learn in the process of building anything. I'll just pick a couple that might be relevant for this conversation. One is
Sure.
people. It's all about people and how you treat people. And there's some people I think I treated really well, and I'm really proud of that. There's some who I realize in retrospect, man, I wish I'd done it differently. And
Mm,
many of my regrets are actually about relationships and how you realize as you get older how important relationships are, and how it's very easy in the moment to prioritize, either one group over another group, or one initiative or one goal. And in the end, what it always comes down to is, being able to do your best to treat people really well who've worked with you.
mm,
And it's tough. I'll just tell you a couple of stories in the acquisition. Like, when you're being acquired, you've got effectively a new set of bosses. You've gone from having, your early investors and shareholders who have a board who you feel you report to and are accountable to a corporate sort of group that oversees you. And of course, the corporate group is going to exercise their control and want you to make certain decisions about who to keep, who not to keep, who to promote, how to change things. You're going to have opinions. And one other thing you realize in these large organizations is those opinions aren't consistent. So
mm,
what one person thinks in one group is different than what somebody else in a different group in the same corporation thinks. And I was so young and naive. I was in my early 30s when I sold. I just honestly didn't know what I didn't know. And in
mhm,
retrospect, I think I would probably have not not taken the advice of so many different people from the acquirer, and probably stuck with my own views a little bit more. I
mhm,
wanted to listen. I wanted to obviously impress them. They just bought my company. I felt I was learning from them. So I was like,
mm,
taking their advice on everything. And I think some of my regrets are, geez, I should probably have just said, here's what I believe. Here's why I believe it. I hear you loud and clear. And I'm happy to have a debate with you about who's right. But I think I just assumed they were right a little bit too much. That,
sure.
that's one of my regrets.
All right. And was that so after the company was acquired, you served as the CEO for 2 years.
I did.
Uh, was that not, I don't want to say a constant fight. I don't want to make it sound negative, but was that something that you were kind of dealing with as you now are
It was a
not
crazy time, Nick.
sure?
It was the roller coaster. I've gone through a lot of trials and tribulations in my life, but those 2 years, the first year was incredible. Okay. The US had
Hmm.
not hit the 2008 recession yet. So companies bought,
Hmm.
say, May 2007. We're growing, growing, growing. First 12 months, even, I would say, were just gangbusters amazing. Okay, hitting every target, making plans to launch a student loan, Virgin branded student loan, so any young person in America could finance their education with a Virgin branded student loan. Launching an entrepreneur loan, right? America's
Mm,
first business loan for entrepreneurs. Obviously scored properly with some bells and whistles about friends and family money. During the loan had some kind of unique flavors to it. Launching a mortgage for first-time home buyers, where you could get money from friends and family, and you could get money from us and be able to get a more affordable mortgage with more flexible terms than any other lender in the US. So really innovative products, okay?
mm,
Wall Street Journal's writing great articles about us. The cover of American Banker, like you can imagine, it was amazing. Then the recession hit. Then we're in the middle of a credit crunch. And Virgin is a brand, right? We have no
mm,
real bank behind us in those days that gives
mm,
us depositor money to lend. So we're a brand, we lend other people's money, and we have a website that intermediates between people to create economic value. And so when you're in a credit crunch, in a recession, I'm not sure if you've lived through a recession, Nick, but if you've lived through a recession that is a credit crunch, it means that people stop lending. So if you're a brand that attracts leads, and we were very good at attracting leads, we were very, very good at marketing. So we had hundreds of thousands of leads, and we couldn't now have warehouse lines, as they're called, to fund those loans.
mm,
And we were planning to launch, as I said, a student loan, a business loan, and a mortgage. So a week before, we'd already taken out the ads in the Wall Street Journal. In fact, I remember one of the ads. It was Virgin, tongue-in-cheek, very suggestive. Looking for a threesome was the ad. Okay.
mhm,
Because it was trying to say that you know, the bank, you as a borrower, and your friends and family, which would create a better economic value for everyone buying a home. So clever ads. And we had to pull the plug a week
mm,
before. And because Bear Stearns went under, and this is before Lehman Brothers. So, and then Lehman Brothers, a few months later, went under, and the US was entering a period of giant uncertainty.
mhm,
And giant uncertainty, particularly during a credit crunch period, means a marketer who attracts leads cannot fund those leads. So in other words, you can't
mm,
actually make money anymore because you make money based on the margin of what people pay and what you're borrowing at. And so it was a very difficult time.
mm,
Partly because Virgin also wanted to grow. Virgin wanted us to launch these products. Richard even called me and said, "We've got to launch these products." So it was a crazy time. Um, I learned a lot from the process. We ended up buying a bank. We meaning Virgin Corporate bought a bank,
mm,
but I got to be part of the, I would say, early stage conversations to reformulate Virgin Money into a bank. And Jane Ann Gadia, who's a really prominent businesswoman in the UK, came on board as the chair of Virgin Money globally, and she became chair of our board. And she, really wanted to transform the organization, which in retrospect was a smart decision for Virgin, not as smart a decision, obviously, for the US operation, which wasn't a bank. And we
mm,
decided not to buy a bank in the US. We decided to buy a bank in the UK for a number of potentially very obvious reasons, given where Virgin's brand is strong. So Virgin bought Northern Rock, and the whole company, of course, changed overnight to becoming a regulated bank. So that's why I said it was a very tumultuous time. Year one was great. Year two was complex. And for me, it was a chance for me to frankly learn the real meat, the real meat of financial
mm,
services. Like how how banks make money, how marketers make money, how warehouse lines make money, how each element of the value chain is able to generate a margin, and how consumers sometimes win and sometimes don't win. So for me, incredible education. And what I ended up doing next, I can fast forward a little bit if you'd like into what I did next, but
Sure.
it allowed me to sort of see the consumer balance sheet of
Mhm,
the consumer balance sheet, think of it this way. There's assets and liabilities, right?
Hmm.
So liabilities are, um, you know, when you're in debt. And assets are the money you have in the bank, the money you have in your investments. And I actually one day did a slide where just for my own edification, I looked at all the products that people buy, financial products, whether they're loans like mortgages or credit card debt or investments they make and money they have in the bank. And I figured out how much money each um, supplier of those products was making, how much margin they made.
Hmm.
Because I was intellectually interested in it. And I also thought at the time when I was running Virgin, we could play in both sides of the balance sheet if we thought carefully about it. And I think what it revealed for me is um, on the lending side, on the liability side of the balance sheet, where consumers are borrowing money, um, the companies that provide those products make so much because the margins are so high. But on
Mm.
the other side of the balance sheet, where consumers are giving you money to hold in a bank account or for investments, um, the margins are lower, but the disruption hadn't happened yet. The disruption, because of the internet, had already happened on the lending side of the balance sheet because the margins were bigger. So there was more money, basically, to save the consumer by a third party like Virgin Money coming in and saying, we're going to do this for less margin. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So my next business, which I'll fast forward to, is Covestor,
Hmm.
was on the investment side, the asset side of the consumer balance sheet, where there's lower margin, but nobody had been disrupting these products before. So I can tell you what we
Hmm.
did if you like, but it was just to sort of frame it in my own mind. I came to realize that I could add value on both sides of the consumer balance sheet after thinking about it that way.
All right. Before we talk about what exactly you were doing, I do want to ask, was there a definitive moment that led you to leave Virgin Money, or was there something that what happened?
Yeah, sure. So I've been there 2 years, and Virgin was becoming a bank, so it made sense. It was around my 2 year anniversary, almost exactly, that um, I was not going to be able to move to the UK and basically want to join corporate. And what we were doing in the US was clearly not going to be part of their going forward strategy. So it really made sense for the founder of the organization, the CEO, to step aside.
Hmm.
And the company, a year and a half later, when the bank deal went through, they decided to sell the original loans, the person-to-person loans, to Greystone, which is another company, and they decided to not be in the mortgage business anymore. We'd entered the mortgage
Hmm.
business by acquiring the assets of a company called Lendia, and they sold that company back to the founder a year and a half after I left. So I could kind of see the writing on the wall that this was going
Hmm.
to change. So it made
Yeah,
sense for me to move on.
sure. What's that like having it all like this thing that you built? Now you have
Oh, crazy
somebody.
times. It was crazy. I mean, so because we'd gone through this period of
Hmm.
a recession for a year, and because a year before that we'd added all these new products, the original business of Circle Lending was a relatively small share of the entire portfolio of things that we were doing or planning to do.
Hmm.
So in my mind, the Circle Lending piece, which obviously I'd founded and I had a lot of emotional attachment to, was part of, in my mind, the thing I was most nervous or I guess protective of leaving behind as I left. But I honestly, by then, it's like having multiple children, right? I had many other things that I also cared about. I also
Hmm.
cared about the new products we launched. Um, but when you're in a corporation and you're also negotiating to buy a bank and you're, meeting with investment bankers about this, it was like a massive deal. It was over $1 billion. It was a massive deal.
Wow.
And you start to get excited is one word, also anticipatory, and you start thinking about what can be, right? And for me, I'd say I moved past the emotional attachment to the company I founded about a year into my job there.
Mm.
Um, but clearly, I mean, a year and a half afterwards, when it sold to another company, which I anticipated would happen, it was obviously very disappointing from a legacy standpoint. You build something you want it
Mm.
to last, right? And that
Yeah.
was the first experience I had, and I've had many, many since, by the way, of seeing a product that's working get shut down or get transferred or moved because of corporate strategy.
Yeah.
And it's actually very challenging, particularly for young people, I will say, who work on things, who get, you know, I have the benefit in my job now of working with a lot of young people. And one of the things that really motivates young people is the creative energy of building something.
Mm.
And it is very challenging and disappointing when the thing you've spent months, weeks, maybe even years building gets either transformed, renamed, or transferred or shut down. And it happens all the time. In fact, it will happen even more given AI and given all the trends of the rapid change we're all living through. The idea of something you've worked on having permanence beyond even 5 years is rare, rare,
Wow.
and will be increasingly rare. So I think that's one of the complexities of certainly running a technology company, but running any type of company where you spend your heart and soul building something that is going to get transformed or morphed into something else by other people. Um, we have to become better as leaders at helping have a sense of closure so people can move on, or even starting to celebrate when things move on to their next life.
Mm.
So it
Okay.
is great that Virgin Money continued to thrive and bought a bank and then got acquired again years later with another exit. I mean, literally, it is a good thing, not a bad thing. But people who worked on a period of time during that journey will, of course, reflect on it and look at like their own contribution on that journey.
Hmm.
And I think one job of great leaders is to help people make sense and feel appreciated and feel grateful and maybe even feel happy for their role in these journeys. And it's very, very hard, I think, for younger people who don't have the benefit of the perspective of sitting, at 10,000 feet and looking down upon themselves in their roles, to look at it that way because they're so focused on their contribution. And of course, we all have ego, right? I, of course, have the ego of being a founder and wanting to see the thing I created last. But then you start to realize that that's really not what it's about, right? It's
Mm.
like, is what you're doing, the way you spend your time helping people or not? That's a nicer framing in your mind.
Yeah.
As you get more into a leadership role, you start to care more about not just the products you build, but the people whose careers you help. And you get so much satisfaction, so much, at least I get so much more satisfaction now about mentoring great leaders and making sure they have successful careers than I get out of building another good product.
Oh. All right. When do you think that transition was for you?
So I think I've had a few sort of different leadership roles, and for each leadership role, I think there's a bit of a transition for me. So when I was
Hmm.
running Circle Lending and I was a founder, the way decisions get made in that circumstance are very much around what the founder wants, just by virtue of you're the majority owner in those days, and you have the vision, so people are like waiting for you to decide.
Mm.
Then in my next company, which I haven't talked a bit about, where I was CEO of Covestor,
Hmm.
I was hired by the venture capital firms to run the business. So I wasn't the
Mm.
founder. I had extremely smart colleagues who had different roles in the company. Even though I was CEO, I felt that my job as leader was to get the best idea out of the group. So let's all listen to
Hmm.
each other's points of view. Let's sit and debate it. Red team, blue team, we'll do what we have to do and figure out the best way forward. In my current role at Junior Achievement, where I've been for over a decade now, it's a very big global organization. And my role as
Hmm.
leader is not necessarily to have the right idea. It's not necessarily
Hmm.
to even let people talk amongst themselves and figure out which is the best idea. It's to empower all the national leaders and regional leaders and other staff to really be able to accomplish their goals.
Mm.
and to remove obstacles in their way and to provide meaning and a vision and a set of values that we all want to be associated with, like in many ways, like Richard did for Virgin, having a brand that people want to be associated with. JA Worldwide, the part of the organization that I'm leading, it owns the brand of Junior Achievement. So we're trying to
Hmm.
build a brand that people want to be associated with, whether they're young people or whether they're board members. We have over 6,000 board members in our organization.
Wow. Wow.
Um, Corporate volunteers, we have 250,000 corporate volunteers and about the same number of teachers around the world. So it's a very, very big global community. And I see my job as very much creating a set of brand values and a set of business practices and projects and strategies that people want to be associated with.
Hmm.
And that's a very different way to think about leadership than trying to have the best idea or get the best idea from a group of people. So I'm not sure if I answered your question, Nick, but that's sort of the arc of the journey that where I've realized, my role is different based on what kind of organization I'm leading.
Yeah, that did answer my question. So let's talk about Covestor then. What's it like now you're being brought in by that venture capital firm to be the new person in charge versus the contrast of where you're at with Circle Lending of being the founder? How was that transition for you?
So it was very different.
Hmm.
I had this amazing situation where I was at Thomson Reuters before. I skipped that part a little bit, but I'll
That's
fast forward a
okay.
little bit. I was leading new
Hmm.
media for Thomson Reuters and realizing that the media landscape is completely changing. The way people interact with news is changing. And Thomson Reuters had assets such as Lipper, which competes with Morningstar, just to give you an example of one of the many assets. Thomson, big financial company, merged with Reuters, big media company, bring them together, lots of opportunity. Okay. That's
Mm.
the quick version of the story. And I had a chance to look at ways to modernize the organization based on the great technology teams that we had and the product lines that we had and how consumer behavior is changing. So all these things are happening at the same time after a big merger. And this small company called Covestor enters my radar. And this company was doing really creative things. It allowed, first of all, full democratization of money management. This is now remember I talked about consumer balance sheet? This is the
Hmm.
assets of the consumer balance sheet. People make investments, they own assets, right?
Hmm.
So now people are making investments and they're no longer going to the Wall Street Journal and looking at the mutual fund rating that Lipper or Morningstar has and making a decision like that. They're going on the internet and they're searching for either stocks or money managers. They're looking for reviews. They're looking for sort of wisdom and knowledge, news, which helps them
Hmm.
guide their decisions. Okay.
Hmm.
Covestor had built a online community where anyone in the world could become a top money manager by showcasing what they were buying and their portfolio and why they were buying it.
Hmm.
Okay. So you didn't have to only go to the top person at Fidelity and say this
Hmm.
person knows more than anyone else about what stocks to buy or what investments to make. Here you could go online and basically search for the best talent, which could be, in your bedroom in Slovakia.
Hmm.
Right? It could be anywhere.
Yeah.
So, and as you know, I'm sure you know this, talent is everywhere and opportunity is not.
Yeah.
So this is true democratization of investment talent. And so I felt this was an asset that had a lot of untapped value. And I was looking for ways to grow the business. And I was brought in by the venture capital firm to run it, the venture capital firms to run it. And it was acquired 4 years later by Interactive Brokers. And the reason Interactive Brokers bought us is Interactive Brokers was our transaction engine, our broker that did the
Hmm.
transactions. We built technology to replicate in real time the trades that these investors were making. So if you're sitting somewhere in the world and you're making trades, our technology replicated in real time what those trades are. So anyone could basically follow your portfolio.
Mm.
But one insight we had is, people like you, Nick, may not want to follow the portfolio of some random person in some part of the world. So we needed to
Yeah.
create an interface that made you get the benefit of their wisdom, but also protect your assets. So we were licensed as a registered investment advisor. It's one of the things which, when I joined, we did in the US, and we built what's called a separately managed accounts marketplace, SMA marketplace, which is a fancy
Okay.
way to say The money could stay in your account, Nick. So it was your brokerage account, your money,
Hmm.
but you would give the right effectively to an advisor, us, be able to execute trades with your money. So you don't have to send us the money. You could sort of keep the money in your own Interactive Brokers account that you controlled, but you gave us the
Hmm.
right to execute a strategy that somebody else around the world was doing. This was a very radical concept because it could disintermediate the financial advisor completely. You wouldn't have to go to your financial advisor, Fidelity, anymore to go look for the
Hmm.
strategies. You could, on your own, pick them on our marketplace, pick this one, that one, and that one, and then a month later change your mind and say, I don't like those ones. I like these ones instead. And you can see very transparently what people are buying, what their educational background is, what their fees are. We split the fee 50-50 on the marketplace, which was very transparent. So you also knew how much we were getting paid. We just brought like radical transparency to a very opaque part of the consumer balance
Hmm.
sheet, which is investments. And there's a reason why companies like Fidelity have giant offices in Boston and in Rhode Island because
Hmm.
they actually generate a lot of margin. You may not know that because, of course, you're just choosing to give them your money and saying, please manage it for me. But there is a lot of margin built into those businesses. So we were looking for ways
Hmm.
to make the consumer win through more transparency.
Oh, all right. That's awesome. Okay, I almost don't want to, but I think we're gonna have to. So after spending most of your career really radically changing the way that people deal with money and democratizing it in really fascinating ways, you joined Junior Achievement Worldwide, which is a nonprofit. One, could you talk a little bit about what they do? A lot of people know Junior Achievement, just cover our bases.
Yeah.
And then why you made the decision to pivot to this nonprofit organization.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. One I've had to answer many times, as you can imagine. So I got connected to Junior Achievement by one of the largest funders of the organization, where I'd served on a board with her, and she runs a large foundation. And she, when Covoster was being acquired by Interactive Brokers, she said to me, "Why don't you look at this opportunity? I think you're perfect for it." And so I looked into it and I met some of the members of the board, and I was so impressed with the organization. To be honest, I knew Junior Achievement like a student would. I went through JA when I was 14 years old, my first experience with entrepreneurship. I looked at it from that angle. I didn't
Hmm.
look at it from the angle of, management and leadership of this organization. So when I switched, I guess the side of the prism I was looking through, I got
Hmm.
to see the organization in a different light. To keep with the metaphor, almost like a rainbow, right? So I
Of course.
saw
Uh-huh.
the incredible diversity of this global organization. I got more and more curious, and then I would say enamored, and then passionate about the organization. And let me explain what we do. So we deliver programs, learning experiences to young people all over the world, over 100 countries. We deliver these learning experiences typically in schools and typically to youth from elementary school through to college in that wide range, depending on the country. We're probably most known for our high school programs, but we have programs starting in elementary school all the way through to mid-20s. And those educational programs, those educational experiences have a number of things in common. One thing they have in common is they're all about learning by doing. So we're not an organization that's about sort of didactic teaching. We're an
Hmm.
organization that's about really experiential learning. And this organization was one of, if not the first organization founded in 1919 to bring, for
Wow.
example, experiential entrepreneurship learning to schools. So we're like a pioneering organization as well, which has some benefits and also has some complexity because when you're trying to make some change, it's obviously hard when you've got all this resident history. Having said that,
Hmm.
this organization has different brands as well around the world. So Junior Achievement is our global brand, JA, and we license that brand to different national offices around the world. And we've grown through acquisition over the years, and we've expanded to new markets, and we've translated the word achievement in different languages. So we've got a bunch of different brands. In the Middle East, we're known as Injaz, which is achievement in Arabic. So you right now are in UAE, right?
Yep.
So our brand there is Injaz UAE,
Hmm.
uh, mainly in Dubai, but I think in the other Emirates as well. Um, um, and our brand in the UK, for those of your listeners who are in the UK, our brand is Young Enterprise,
Hmm.
which has been in the UK for over 60 years and is a well-known institution. So we reach more young people than any other youth serving organization on the planet in schools, delivering programs in entrepreneurship, financial literacy, and work readiness. So these are three big areas. So it's this incredible distribution network to communicate messages and to help build the right skill set and mindset for young people to thrive in the workforce of the future, which I have just realize is one of the most valuable assets in the world. Like to be able to reach young people at scale is an incredible, incredible thing. So we
Yeah.
partner with 70% of the Fortune 200, many of the largest companies on earth and organizations on earth, to build deep partnerships, to build educational programs, to help basically get young people ready for the workforce of the future. It's in everyone's interest to do this. It's an organization that appeals to people across the political divide. It's an organization that appeals to people in different types of regimes around the world. So we operate um, in India and Pakistan, in China and the U.S., in Ukraine, and we have been in Russia in the past for many years. So we do our best to deliver programs that are helping youth be ready for the future. And we do it in partnership with school systems. So it's a really amazing, energizing organization.
Yeah. That's awesome. Uh, part of, I have to imagine that being the leader of an organization like that, fundraising is a large part of what you do, as just by the nature of the organization, I'm assuming. Were there skills that you brought in from your founding days to kind of help out with the money side of things?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, one reason I felt I could add value in this job is I'd had a lot of experience with fundraising from different groups of people. Um, in my first business, it was from angel investors, people like Jeff Bezos, and then over time from venture capital firms and family offices, and then over time from banks. As I said, we went into the lending business, and so I sort of had enough sets of experiences with raising money from different personality types and parts of the world that I felt I could add value in that way. The one thing I realized, Nick, is that is a much smaller part of my job than I thought.
Hmm.
I assumed, a bit like you do, you run a nonprofit, you've got to raise money, that's a big part of your job. The great thing is in our organization, I have many, many colleagues, many leaders around the world who are very, very good at that. So it is part of my job, and certainly at the global level with the global funders, that is, I certainly collaborate with people on my team to do that. But it's not the whole job by any stretch of the imagination. And I would say it's a declining part of my job as I've gotten great people and the brand becomes more and more appealing for funders. It's the part of my job that I think is perhaps even sort of more top of mind for me now
Mhm.
is empowering other people to succeed and to
Mhm.
removing obstacles in their way. So, like almost everyone has a project they're working on that they're passionate about. And how do you navigate a big global complex organization to make sure that project succeeds?
Uh-huh.
Requires everyone getting along, supporting each other, building a culture where we're supportive, not just blocking each other for, the usual reasons. Sometimes people might block each other. That to me is a bigger part of my job.
All right. Very nice. What are some of the highs and lows of leading a nonprofit?
Highs and lows. Nick, my goodness. I mean, the highs are you get to interact with young people who are achievement oriented, which is incredibly empowering. I mean,
Hmm.
they bring me energy. When I go and meet, for example, I was just a judge for a student competition of young entrepreneurs in high school. You get to see these amazing pitches, and you're like, God, this kid's gonna go so far. Like almost like, how can I support him now? Or support her now.
Hmm.
And I get to see young people going through transformations where before they go through our programs, I tell the story of these girls who were 14 years old, and they like the daughters of like rickshaw drivers. And I got to see them meet this female executive of GE, and she talked about what she does for a living, and every girl wanted to be her. And just seeing them go from sort of not knowing this thing existed to knowing this thing existed, and now aspiring to be
Yeah.
like this person. Because of course, if your dad's a rickshaw driver, your mom's a rickshaw driver, your friends are going to be, or your parents' friends are going to be the only role models you have for what's possible. That and maybe
Yeah.
social media. So now seeing somebody who kind of went to your school and now works for GE is like transformational for these young girls. They're like, oh, I could be that. I had no idea I could be that.
Yeah.
And seeing part of these moments is some of the highs or the good parts of the job. The
Mhm.
lows of the job, I think like any job, you're going to have to deal with obstacles and challenges.
Mhm.
Um, those challenges usually fall into one or two categories. It's people stuff. People don't get along. They need somebody to intervene. They need somebody to build cohesion around whatever is a source of disagreement. And I get pulled into it. Or there's something geopolitical or something institutional that needs to be fixed. And
Mhm.
right now we're living through this very complex set of a changing world. And the good news is I think JA will thrive in this changing world, but it requires, adjustment and thinking and communicating with people who a year ago might have thought something else and now have changed their point of view. So you have to just always be listening and navigating.
Mhm. All right. I want to pivot kind of hard right now. I want to talk about your book. So, about a
Okay.
year ago, your book, Modern Achievement, was published. Could you talk a little bit about that and what some of your motivation was for writing and publishing a book?
So it's just been an incredibly fun experience. And I like to start my comments about the book by saying, Nick, you too could write a book. A lot of
Okay.
people think book writing is this like hard to do, very difficult, and daunting task.
Mm-hmm.
I'm here to tell you that's what I thought too, and it's much easier than you think. So let me start by saying
Hmm.
that.
Okay.
Um,
ChatGPT helps, I'm assuming. I'm joking. Sorry,
oh,
continue.
no,
No,
I'm glad you
I
said that. I'm really glad you said that because my book was written right before ChatGPT came out.
okay.
So
Okay.
clearly, if ChatGPT had existed, there's no doubt, no doubt that at the very least I would have used it to enhance what we wrote. But because it came out right before, I think we didn't have that either crutch or luxury, depending on your point of view.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so the book is organized into 30 lessons for aspiring leaders. And the reason we did that is I say we because it's co-authored with Marshall Goldsmith. Marshall is this incredibly amazing, generous, and famous sort of business pioneer, I'll call him, which is he's an author of over 30 bestsellers, including some New York Times bestsellers. And he is number one ranked in the Thinkers 50 group of leading management thinkers in the world. Was a former Dartmouth professor, amongst other accomplishments. He's the father of executive coaching. He's probably most
Oh.
known for bringing this new field called executive coaching into the world and being the biggest proponent of the benefits of executive coaching. So I've gotten to know him over the years, and we decided to do a book together. And I can tell you the circumstance of that if you're interested. But the purpose of the book really was to help next generation aspiring leaders have the clarity of these lessons to navigate a world where you're going to have multiple jobs and multiple careers, where even the idea of achievement, which in the old days, most books about achievement were about long-term goal setting, writing down your
Mm-hmm.
long-term goal, visualizing it, and the world would help it happen, right? That's the classic achievement book of the past. If you're going to have multiple goals and multiple careers, that long-term goal setting approach isn't the best way to both define achievement and also to gain satisfaction and to achieve the things you want in life. So we basically have created a framework for how to do that, and we've gotten great contributors to the book to tell their stories to bring some of these lessons to life.
All right. So the framework that you just mentioned is fixed, flexible, freestyle, correct?
It is. You
All
read the
right.
book, Nick. Well done.
Well, I'm going to be completely honest with you. I have not, but I got some key points from it.
Oh, okay. You use
So,
ChatGPT
unfortunately,
or something online to get a book summary.
no, yeah,
Use
there are
AI.
reviews. There are reviews. So I was able to look at some
Okay,
reviews and such.
good.
But I do own a copy, but I have not read it, unfortunately. Sorry to share. But I am curious how you've used this framework that you describe in this book, fixed, flexible, freestyle, in your own career. And how has that changed for you, and how have you grown into that and kind of seeing it this way?
Yeah. So what's nice about this framework is it's really simple. There's some things that are fixed that don't change. There's some things that are flexible that change based on time and place, where you are in your career, where you live in the world, what you do. And then there are things which are freestyle, which are things which are, think of them as um, unique to you based on your strengths, like lessons that maybe won't be relevant for somebody else in the world, but are relevant for you based on
Mhm.
your own strengths and weaknesses. So that's the framework. And we use it at Junior Achievement. So how I've used it, I'll give you one very practical example. At Junior Achievement, when I joined, leading a large complex organization, um, we needed something to be able to help people who, no matter where they lived in the world, to make sense of our strategy, for example. So fixed, flexible, freestyle helped us create a very simple framework with language that can be used by anyone to figure out what is globally fixed, for example, things like our brand, what changes based on time and place, flexible. So for example, our programs, our educational programs in Europe versus Africa have to be different. In Africa, 70% of youth are out of school. So our programs include out of school youth programs, digital programs as well. While in Europe, we primarily reach kids in school. So, and of course, we help with Ukrainian refugees in Europe. So we have a program focused on translating some of our programs to Ukrainian, no matter where the Ukrainian refugees have moved to in Europe. That's an example of something that's relevant for Europe, but may not be as relevant for Africa, right? And then
Mhm.
freestyle, things are completely locally developed based on the strengths and weaknesses and capabilities of local offices, local teams, local people. So that was a way in which fixed flexible freestyle was applied in a very real way in the recent past of my life. Going back to my early career, which is kind of where you are in your life, Nick. Of course, I didn't have the benefit of thinking this framework, but I definitely would say there were some fixed values, fixed principles, fixed ways I had to think about my career, things like the purpose I had, things like in my early career, I talked about empowering people and I talked about understand the consumer balance sheet, like things which are relatively fixed in the way I made decisions. And then I would say so many things would vary based on time and place. And when people told me a lesson, I needed some way to figure out if this is something that's a lesson that's going to be true for the rest of my life, or it's something that's only relevant for this moment of my life, kind of where I am
Mhm.
right now. And then freestyle is very much about design thinking, right? So how do you design the life you love? How do you actually have enough adaptability to change based on where the world is headed? So that's why the framework has been popular. That's why I think the book has done reasonably well. We've got translations now in many different languages. The book just launched in India. It's kind of cool to see the book in bookstores across India because, of course, I was born there. So it gives me even more satisfaction to see the ability to impact people there.
Yeah.
So it's been just a really great journey. It's writing a book, particularly with Marshall, has been a very, very positive experience.
All right. That's incredible. Thank you so much for sharing everything. Do you have any pieces of advice that you'd like to give to anybody who's looking to take control of their career and making it what they want?
Well, Nick, I'm going to focus on advice for people your age. Okay.
Okay.
In your early 20s. Is that right? 20?
Yes, correct.
Yes. Okay. So, one of the lessons in the book is to make friends 5 to 10 years older than you. Okay. I'm guessing most of your friends, Nick, are your age or thereabouts.
Correct.
And if you're going to have multiple careers and multiple jobs and go through many career transitions, you're going to have to build your network. And while it's great to know people my age, it's even better to know people who are 5 to 10 years older than you because they will be your role models. They will be your mentors. They will help introduce you to job opportunities. They will just help you be ready for some of the changes that are coming before they come to you. And I think most
Mhm.
people, particularly your age, haven't thought about that because, of course, why would you? You're sort of focused on your own social network and your own friend groups. But it's
Yeah.
so important. And if I think of the people who've been most influential in my life, it's those people who are just a little bit ahead of me who helped
Hmm.
me navigate choices. Like I mentioned, even going to visit a friend when I was in school who was at Oxford. And I didn't know you could even go to Oxford. I didn't know you could apply to scholarships, and I would never have known that if I hadn't
Yeah.
gone to meet him. My parents might have intuitively told me that, but I wouldn't have thought about it the same way without going and seeing and meeting him.
Hmm.
And then even later in my life with raising money, I learned so much from people who'd gone before me, both to raise money for startups, but then even to raise money from philanthropy. So having those mentors, role models, and people just a little bit ahead of you, I think is worth prioritizing.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I don't have any questions for you. It's been an incredible conversation. I'm going to be sure to share your book. I don't think you need any of my help promoting it, but I'll certainly do
Nick, I
my,
need you to read the book. You have a copy of the book. Like
Yes.
literally every chapter is 5 pages long. So you have no excuse for the I'm too busy thing. Just open up to a random chapter, pick a lesson, tell me your favorite one, text me afterwards and say, I really like this lesson. I hadn't thought about it, or I can't believe this lesson. I disagree completely. I'm happy for that kind of feedback. Okay?
All right. That sounds great. All right. Thank you so much, Ashish. It's been a true pleasure.
All right. Thanks, Nick. Enjoy.
I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you have any thoughts, feedback, or just want to say hi, shoot me an email at nick@reroutedpod.com. If you like the show, leave a review, give us a follow, and subscribe. You can find links to our website, socials, and the link to buy Modern Achievement in the description below. I'm looking forward to seeing you next week.